We're ready. Should we start? Thank you.
So, welcome everyone. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce you Natalia Juchniewicz. She's a philosopher and sociologist, and she is a professor at the University of Warsaw and head of the Philosophy of Technology and Communication Lab. Her areas of expertise are philosophy of technology, social philosophy, Hegel, but also migration. And today, the topic of our talk is on the different senses of recognition in the human-AI relationship. And before giving her the word, I just remind you that we are recording the session, so we are streaming it. And after Natalia's presentation, we will have mostly 1 hour for the Q&A. So Natalia, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful invitation. And yes, today I want to share with you some of my research. This is a work in progress because usually the most interesting comments we all could get to our work in progress. So I hope that you will also help me to improve my project and generally to talk with me about different aspects of the theory of recognition in the context of human-AI relationship. And I will start to share a presentation with you. I hope you should see it now. And okay, so I will start. The problem of recognition has been a subject of reflection in the field of social philosophy and politics for many decades. Issues of individual and collective, gendered, colonial, and class identity have been addressed in the area of this reflection. In recent years, however, the problem of recognition is also becoming a subject of reflection in the field of philosophy of technology, because technologies based on user profiling, tracking their behaviors, monitoring their practices, significantly contribute to shaping the identities of individuals. The aim of my presentation is to demonstrate the relevance of recognition theory in the era of human relationships with artificial intelligence. My lecture will be divided into 2 parts. In the first, I will consider theoretical issues related to the application of recognition theory to AI research. And in the second, I will focus on highlighting empirical problems related to the recognition relationship built between humans and AI. Oops, wait a minute. Okay, now. By artificial intelligence, I mean a human-created algorithm capable of independent learning without human supervision. A technology capable of analyzing large data sets and identifying patterns in them without prior programming of the analysis methods such as machine learning, neural networks, natural language processing, and robotics. We encounter AI in our daily lives, such as on social media platforms, internet search engines, programs based on large linguistic models such as translators, or in big data analysis programs used by police units, corporations, or hospitals. AI is used by individuals, private persons, private corporations, as well as public institutions, and more broadly by states. From the user's perspective, AI can take the form of a program, interface, chatbot, something generally embedded in computers, or a social robot, toy, or artistic installation. In a sense, artificial intelligence is everywhere we encounter modern digital technologies. What is the connection between recognition theory and AI? The theory of recognition allows for describing the formation of intersubjectivity, the subject's respect for oneself and others, and the struggle for the recognition of individual rights and social groups. The question that arises at this point is whether it is possible to replace the human in this relationship with technology. So generally, we understand that in the, for example, probably the best known Hegelian tradition, recognition theory assumes that we, through the intersubjective relation with another self-consciousness, another being, the other, we can actually understand ourselves. And the question is whether we can replace a human being with an artificial intelligence. Nolan Gertz considers this issue referring to Hegel. Gertz attempts to use the struggle for recognition from the phenomenology of spirit as a basis for reflecting on the relationship between humans and robots. And he asserts that to include technology in the dialectics of recognition, it has to be made a seemingly illicit move, because we have to change this theory a little bit to make this replacement possible. We have to focus rather on that how in the Hegelian process of recognition, the first moment of confrontation between self-consciousnesses looks like. The emphasis here is on the fact that the other has to appear to be a consciousness and not necessarily to be a consciousness. This move is justified if we look at the struggle for recognition as a method to confirm subjectivity as subjectivity. In the moment of recognition, self-consciousness does not know itself and has to confirm who it is. To do this, it needs another self-consciousness, but first of all, it has to recognize this other as a self-consciousness. Hegel says self-consciousnesses exist in and for itself when and by the fact it exists for another. That is, it exists only in being acknowledged. And this is, of course, obvious. It is indeed certain of its own self, but not of the other, and therefore its own self-certainty still has no truth. So, of course, this first self-consciousness has to, achieve this truth of itself, but through the other, but unfortunately knows only itself, not the other. As Gertz states, the moment of recognition answers rather the problem of who we are than who the other is. So it is based on the projection of own desires and needs of a self-consciousness onto the other, since it does not know what being a self-consciousness truly means. In the broadest sense, the relationship between AI and recognition theory concerns the new conditions for shaping the subject, who constructs themselves and their relationships with others not only directly, but also through technology that mediates this connection. In this sense, technology, particularly AI, can play a dual role in the recognition relationship. It can either be inserted as a substitute for another, as a stand-in for the subject, or it can mediate the relationship between one self-consciousnesses and another. So we have two possibilities. Either we assume that we replace another self-consciousness with AI, or we assume that, for example, if we come back to the previous slide, that AI is actually between two human subjects, and because of this mediation, changes something in the recognition relation. One might argue that technology has always mediated the relationship between the subject and the environment or the other people. Yes, but it did not profile its users, did not categorize them, did not curate content for them, and did not drain them of data about themselves. To take a closer look at what AI does to social relationships, including the construction of identity by the subject, let's recall the themes of recognition theory as defined by Axel Honneth, Charles Taylor, and Judith Butler. One of the most influential interpretations of the theory of recognition was one delivered by Axel Honneth. Following Hegel and Mead, Honneth states that there are three forms of recognition: love, right, and solidarity. Solidarity, sometimes translated as ethicality or emphasized through the concept of esteem. Love is necessary to build self-confidence and should be delivered in a family where the needs of people, especially children, because especially for Honneth important is this relation between mother and child, are an object of parents' care. Through love, a person could build the elementary feeling of themselves and their physical integrity. Right is an expression of cognitive respect of people to a human being understood as being able to behave morally responsibly, knowing that a person is not only recognized by their own family, but also is a subject of right, builds self-respect and a feeling of autonomy, which is a basis for having legal rights. Solidarity is shared with other people when we admire their input to a society based on their values, profession, engagement, etc. It means that a person could achieve social esteem because of the significance she has for society. According to Honneth, all of these forms of recognition could have their opposition, such as abuse or rape, denial of rights or exclusion, and denigration or insult, which should also be taken into account when the social significance of recognition is analyzed. All of these three forms of recognition, love, right, and solidarity, were grounded in Honnethian theory on empirical research, mainly psychological, from psychoanalytical and research based on social sciences. What strengthened, but also limited, the talk about recognition as human-oriented. So we generally, assumed that recognition is a dyadic relation between humans. Furthermore, Honneth emphasizing the significant role of recognition in shaping the subject also demonstrates that forms of misrecognition are socially crucial because they hinder the development of the individual, the ability to be oneself, and the building of healthy and proper relationships with others. The key dimension of his theory, therefore, is to draw attention to the normative dimension of recognition. On the other hand, Charles Taylor's theory highlights authenticity as a new Enlightenment-inspired way of understanding the subject as an individual capable of being oneself. Taylor states, before the late 18th century, no one thought that the differences between human beings had this kind of moral significance. There is a certain way of being human that is my way. I am called upon to live my life in this way and not in imitation of anyone else's life. But this notion gives a new importance to being true to myself. The issue of how to live authentically is revealed by Taylor through paying attention to both what connects us to people and what distinguishes us from them, both on an individual and group level. This leads to two different recognition-based policies. The first is based on understanding universal human potential, which is the foundation of modern human dignity theory as difference blind. So rights, norms, and principles should be equal for all because in principle, human potential and the directions of its development are equal. The second, on the contrary, emphasizes differences to underscore that ways of life and self-definition should respect the differences among people. As Taylor demonstrates, even though both types of policies are rooted in principles of respect for the subject, they define it in entirely different ways in practice. Moreover, Taylor's theory allows for formulating arguments in favor of recognition, not only for individuals, but also for entire social groups. Taylor says, but the further demand we are looking at here is that we all recognize the equal value of different cultures, that we not only let them survive, but acknowledge their worth. Taylor's theory, similar to Honnett's, emphasizes the normative dimension of recognition, the respect for human dignity as such. However, both of these theories encounter a practical problem, as highlighted by Judith Butler. How do we know that the other with whom we enter into a relationship of recognition possesses qualities that truly make them the other ensuring recognition? So, to sum it up, how can we recognize that the other is this kind of other that we should assign to it social recognition? In other words, before we perform the act of recognizing the subject, we must first perform the act of recognizing them as a subject among other objects. So we have to make this, elementary ability. We have to have this ability to recognize that this is the subject, not the object. Butler states, one comes to exist by virtue of this fundamental dependency on the address of the other. One exists not only by virtue of being recognized, but in a prior sense, by being recognizable. The terms that facilitate recognition are themselves conventional, the effects and instruments of a social ritual that decide, often through exclusion and violence, the linguistic conditions of survival subjects. Butler emphasizes, therefore, that before normative recognition can occur, there must be epistemic recognition, being recognized as a subject. However, Honneth ignores this dispute between normative and epistemic recognition, even stating that in a theory of recognition inspired by Hegel's Anerkennung, recognition cannot transform into Erkennen, recognizing, and these are two completely different levels of discussion. And this is, of course, maybe a funny problem from linguistic point of view, because, we have German language and we have two different verbs, anerkennen and erkennen. And in English, we have only one, recognition. And of course, the problem is that what kind of meanings we actually have in these two forms of recognition and recognizing, and whether we can simply say that recognition is only about Anerkennung and never about Erkennen, whereas Butler states that Erkennen, so this ability to recognize, to some sense categorize, is also significant and could be actually the beginning for the real Anerkennung, so the real normative recognition. Butler, although shifting her considerations towards discourse, language, and gender, points to an extremely important social, cultural, and political problem of being inserted into certain patterns due to being recognized as a person with specific characteristics. And I like this quotation because it really explains all of this problem with epistemic recognition very well. The doctor who receives the child and pronounces, "It's a girl," begins that long string of interpolations by which the girl is transitively girled. Gender is ritualistically repeated, whereby the repetition occasions both the risk of failure and the congealed effect of sedimentation. In this sense, the act of recognition becomes an act of constitution. The address animates the subject into existence. Honneth, on the contrary, states that epistemic recognition through identification has no normative consequences. And he said it expresses verbis. And this, however, is being discussing because the most common dyadic divide in the society on women and men is an example of not something neutral in the social and political meaning, because it is oppressive on different levels of sexual and social identification, not to mention more complicated divides. Honneth believes that the theory of recognition is a theory of Anerkennung, and the social context in which the human subject operates determines the conditions of recognition. Therefore, it can be said that his perspective arises from within the dynamics of society, from the existing circumstances that determine the possibility of a potential struggle for recognition. I believe Taylor's theory is similar to Honneth in this approach. On the other hand, Butler raises the question of what defines the conditions of social life as such and not others. She inquires about the boundaries of social existence, the principles of inclusion and exclusion from the human community, which in her view occur through the performative function of language and, in a broader sense, discourse. Okay, what relevance does this dispute between recognition theorists have for research on artificial intelligence? Well, the dispute is crucial because in AI research, recognition most often boils down to the recognition of the human subject by artificial intelligence. So the discussion takes place in the realm of epistemic recognition. As I will show, however, the perspective of epistemic recognition is linked to normative recognition, and in the next step, it generates further interpretative and practical problems. What AI does with human data is identifying and categorizing people similarly to that what Butler says about language, discourse, so this division between epistemic and normative recognition. This issue is described by Rosalie Whalen. She points out facial recognition technology, which is used in various technologies, including unlocking our smartphones, allowing the identification of specific individuals, their character traits, tendencies, and attributing them certain possible behaviors. The problem, as Whalen observes, is that these technologies exhibit biases towards individuals with darker skin, women, and individuals under the age of 30. It can be said that in certain age and social cohorts, not only individuals, but entire groups are not sufficiently well recognized by AI, which clearly indicates a connection to Taylor's concept of recognition. The social, legal, and political problems arise when, for example, AI identification technology, So generally, this epistemic recognition is used in police data and may show false positive results for individuals who have been misidentified by the algorithm. When facial recognition is used by law enforcement to identify suspects in images or security footage, but the system is not as accurate when identifying darker-skinned people as it is when identifying their fellow citizens with a lighter skin tone, this implies that darker-skinned are at a higher risk of being falsely identified as suspect. And we have this kind of problems. I found in the newspaper from last year a discussion about using by police in New Orleans in the USA the technology to recognize suspects. And in this example, we see that in a homicide investigation in April, police received a match for a suspect whose photo was provided by a tipster. Police later learned that a person matched from the picture wasn't even in the area during the murder. So, of course, we have lots of problems with facial recognition, for example. AI technology also categorizes people, assigning them to specific groups. In situations related to errors in human identification, AI can incorrectly categorize a specific person as an object or an animal, misclassify the sexual orientation of an individual, or interpret a person's facial expression incorrectly. For example, Asians are often categorized as people who are blinking due to their slanted eyes. Categorizing people generally might be a matter of discussion because it assumes that people can be assigned to specific groups, ignoring the existence of individuals with undefined gender identity or mixed race individuals. As seen in these examples, the debate over whether we can talk about epistemic recognition or only normative recognition is not insignificant. Because the normative problem here turns out to be what results from being properly or improperly recognized by AI. The issue of the relationship between epistemic recognition and normative recognition in the context of the relationship between humans and AI, in my opinion, involves understanding the transition from one form of recognition to another. So we cannot, in my opinion, to analyze it separately. In this sense, I disagree with Honnet that when thinking about unerkennung, we should not evoke erkennen, as recognition is built upon the recognition of the subject as a subject. The theory of recognition in the context of AI thus raises the problem of how we humans are recognized by technology and what normative consequences stem from it. The second significant problem in applying the recognition theory to AI research is how we project human characteristics onto AI, which in some situations makes it unclear whether we are dealing with a bot, chatbot, or if a conversation with AI evokes discomfort comparable to feelings we might have towards humans. In literature, we refer to this as the Eliza effect. Eliza is a chatbot created in 1966 by Joseph Weizenbaum. I'm sorry, I have this, always this feeling to write Jewish names with Polish pronunciation, sorry. So Weizenbaum, which by analyzing sentences written by humans responds with questions. This is a very easy chatbot, still you can find Eliza in the internet and to have a conversation with her. The effect ELIZA had on many users was therapeutic. They could essentially answer their own questions, creating a sense that ELIZA was their therapist. As Weissenbaum noticed, some subjects have been very hard to convince that ELIZA, with its present script, is not human. The fact that during conversations with the chatbot, users felt better, had a sense of comfort or support, was enough for them to anthropomorphize ELIZA. The ELIZA effect in the context of recognition theory brings us to the issue of how recognition unfolds in social life. Arto Laitinen distinguishes between two models of recognition, the response model and the generation model. The first assumes that in society, so I'll be talking about response model first, even if on the slide it's the other way around, I'm sorry. The first, so the response model, assumes that in society, at the moment A recognizes B as X, there are already established patterns for X, so we can compare them to B to verify whether it meets the criteria. So again, to make it simpler, response model assumes that we already have some kind of attributes we usually attribute to different subjects in the situation of being X, and we can simply check whether B, well, is similar to these attributes. This, of course, presupposes that in the initial moment of recognizing the subject as self-consciousness, for example, generally in Hegel's theory, because Laitinen was also inspired by Hegel, such social patterns do not yet exist, so the response model cannot come into play. However, it is of colossal importance for further social life, as the decision about who or what meets certain conditions to be recognized as X can be a cultural, political, legal, or technological matter. The generation model, on the other hand, indicates that in encountering B, we notice certain traits that may lead us to assign it to X, even if there are no rigid criteria or B does not fit them with its characteristics. So again, we can say that, okay, I see some object or some subject, and I attribute, well, not attribute, but I discover some qualities in this other. And because of these qualities, which are revealing, which are not well known from the very beginning, I acknowledge the fact that B is X. And for example, I think that generation model can be understood, for example, through animal rights. We do not speak that we do not say that animals are equal to human beings or are similar to us in anthropomorphizing them, but we, of course, discovered. Well, we revealed the fact that they have some qualities that maybe force us to recognize their rights to some extent. In other words, in this case, we are talking about discovering new features in object B that make us recognize it as X. In my opinion, the responsive model predominates in the discussion about AI, meaning that if we try to replace AI in the position of the subject in the recognition relationship, we look for features in AI that make it resemble a human. This is not unwarranted, but it almost always ends up in a conversation about what it means to be human, thus, at best, engaging in the anthropomorphizing of technology or invoking magical thinking. The generation model, on the other hand, teaches us that AI may encompass features that over time will require us to rethink not only technology itself, but also human beings. If I can replace the subject with artificial intelligence in a satisfying conversation, how will the actual replacement of people with AI in various professions affect social life? And how will it influence the understanding of human abilities relative to AI capabilities? The first significant problem associated with applying recognition theory to the relationship between humans and AI is the issue of reciprocal recognition. A model recognition relationship, closer to, in my opinion, to Fichte's theory than Hegel, is based on the assumption that A recognizes B only when B recognizes A. It would be a symmetrical relationship. The problem is that in Hegel's model of the struggle for recognition from the phenomenology of spirit, and to be honest, only the phenomenology of spirit is being analyzed in the field of philosophy of technology, and I really regret about it. But unfortunately, because also this is a kind of simplification of the theory of recognition, but unfortunately, well, we're referring how it is in philosophy of technology. Okay, so the problem is that in Hegel's model of the struggle for recognition from the phenomenology of spirit, a symmetrical recognition relationship is not present because it would not lead to mastery and slavery, which are certainly not symmetrical. Furthermore, for self-consciousness, what is essential is that it is recognized, not that it recognizes itself, as the other mediates in the relationship of self-awareness with itself. In other words, for recognition, it is crucial whether the other serves as a source of being oneself and a sense of one's dignity. And in many situations, not only technologies, but also other people do not necessarily expect reciprocity from us in a given situation. Heikki Ikäheimo emphasizes the important role of three dimensions of understanding a person in Hegelian tradition. It is an approach of singularity, autonomy, universality, and particularity. In our singularity, we are treated in our suchness. So we are treated as people with our basic needs, where the recognizer is focused on our happiness or well-being. And as autonomous beings, we can be subject to rights, which can be understood as a condition of universal values shared with other people. As particular beings, we want to make a difference between us and other people and be recognized by this difference, not instead of it. In this sense, we represent socially admired worth. Ikäheimo convincingly argues that these three dimensions could or could not be taken into consideration when we apply them to Honnett's division of the forms of recognition of love, right, and solidarity. In love, we are recognized as singular beings, but not fully autonomous. Because when I would not because then I would not need other people to fulfill my needs. I could be a child and my autonomy is limited. And not particular, because parents should love their children even if they are not unique. In right, all of the dimensions of being a human are taken into account. We are humans with our needs because we are autonomous beings, able to behave responsibly, and in our uniqueness when we represent some minority or ethnicity struggling for recognition. Finally, solidarity could take into account only our particularity, because it is based on an emphasis on our unique skills, the values we represent, our contribution to society, etc. The analysis proposed by Ikäheimo allows us to notice that in social life, recognition is not always symmetrical, and in certain relationships, it cannot be so. Sorry. Do we expect parents to treat children subjectively? Yes. And do we expect children to meet the needs of parents as parents meet the needs of the children? No. Because this situation is not symmetrical. Do we believe that outstanding writers can be awarded the Nobel Prize for their achievements? Yes, precisely because they are outstanding and therefore have a particular level of social recognition, and such a situation cannot be symmetrical, as everyone would be outstanding in that case. Applying this issue to AI, we can say that AI recognizes us, but we do not recognize it. Yes. Every day, by opening any social media platform, we allow AI to profile it according to our preferences without thinking much about why we see what we see. The recognition relationship between humans and AI, regardless of whether we acknowledge that it is AI recognizing the subject or the subject recognizing AI, points to a significant normative dimension of artificial intelligence. What AI does to the subject involves influencing its behavior. By shaping behavior, AI co-shapes the conditions for the possibility of specific moral actions, including self-care and care for others. Chatbots or wearable technologies assist in stress reduction, monitoring mental health, alleviating feelings of anxiety, or releasing tension. If we consider these dimensions of being a subject, which are conditioned, for example, by the concept of love in Honet's theory, where the subject gains self-confidence and learns to recognize its own needs, AI can significantly contribute to determining which aspects of self-care the subject may notice. In this sense, such technologies can assist in therapy and provide support in everyday life for patients with conditions such as depression. Being recognized by AI and thus being identified as a person with specific needs and behaviors allows us to view AI as a social agent. Joy Ito says, instead of thinking about AI as separate or adversarial to humans, it's more helpful and accurate to think about machines augmenting our collective intelligence and society. This does not mean that we have to attribute the same characteristics to AI as we do to humans. But we can observe that in some situations, it can effectively replace a human. And is the reverse situation possible, recognizing by a human that AI has specific needs or even rights? The example of soldiers rescuing robots from the battlefield, treating those robots as their comrades, organizing burials for them, and awarding them medals, may, in some respect, be considered dangerous from the perspective of human anthropomorphizing technology. On the other hand, aren't we learning something here about the human capacity for empathy, which can extend to non-human entities? So, of course, for some reasons, we can say that this kind of behavior is a little bit, well, dangerous or maybe not fully rational. But on the other hand, we can learn something from this ability of a human being to extend the empathy, emotions, or in some sense, recognition with non-human beings. In the consequence, it is crucial to understand that intelligent technologies evoke specific effects on a person's self-development, and that technology is capable of showing respect to humans, influencing their self-perception. In other words, AI is a moral entity because it evokes moral consequences in the subject. I do not analyze here whether non-human beings should be considered as persons in the legal sense, but undoubtedly, one cannot easily ignore the co-shaping of normative relationships with humans. Due to the social consequences of building relationships with technology, updating the theory of recognition in this context is crucial. In the subject literature, for instance, social robots are often discussed as building bonds with humans, as capable of creating pseudo-recognition. However, as I have shown, the theory of recognition is broader than just real or pseudo or illusional mutual relationship. To be associated with recognition, technology does not necessarily have to be in a conscious relationship with a human. And conversely, recognizing consciousness in technology is not necessary for it to influence the recognition relationship with humans. However, so far, we have mainly discussed those dimensions of the human-AI relationship that concern recognition and have been positively valued. AI can build our self-esteem, support us in self-improvement, replace our conversation companion, or help us learn empathy. What about the other dimension of the recognition theory, which is misrecognition? I will start with an example. A social robot that has sparked controversy in applications, such as among patients with dementia, is Paro. And to be honest, Paro is not a very sophisticated robot or something like that. It's not even very complicated AI or something like that. James Wright refers the stories from Japanese nursing homes. Paro was received more favorably by staff and residents alike. Shaped like a fluffy, soft toy seal, it can make noises, move its head, and wiggle its tail when users pet and talk to it. At first, care workers were quite happy with the robot. However, difficulties soon emerged. One resident kept trying to skin Paro by removing its outer layer of synthetic fur, while another developed a very close attachment, refusing to eat meals or go to bed without having it by her side. Staff ended up having to keep a close eye on Paro's interactions with residents, and it didn't seem to reduce the repetitive behavior patterns of those with severe dementia. Brink and Balkanius clearly articulate arguments asserting that social robots like Kismet, Sophia, or Pepper, or Paro as well, are unethical in human interactions. First, psychologically, in deceptively offering humans an emotional, feeling-based relationship. Second, morally, in treating humans disrespectfully and irresponsibly by playing with their feelings and denying them the second-person perspective that entails an equal standing. And third, existentially and socially, in placing humans in an undignified position, humiliating and degrading them, not recognizing their personal human value or respecting their integrity. To be honest, in the literature which I know, I think Brink and Balkanius are the most critical towards especially social robots, and they really emphasize very strong arguments, and their critique is really focused on the definition of human dignity, and that's what's going on between human social robots and possibly with also more complicated AI. Brink and Balkanius emphasize primarily that misrecognition is associated with how technologies treat users, which is linked to who designs them, how, and for what purpose. Consequently, broader social, cultural, and political issues will arise concerning the recognition relationship between AI and humans. As I mentioned earlier, especially in reference to the theories of Honneth and Taylor, the theory of recognition allows for describing the development of an individual within social relations. Okay, I see that I should finish because I'm losing my voice, sorry. Addressing both individual and group identities. No worries, it's almost the end. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, in the way it operates, reveals not only its dependence on designers and programmers, but also in a broader sense on culture, society, and politics. Okay, can we misrecognize artificial intelligence by treating it in a morally inappropriate manner? Taylor Walker has shown that voice assistants like Alexa or Siri represent sexist technology, but this sexism could occur along the line of from human being to AI, not only the other way around. Research has shown that Alexa is the subject of a regular sexual harassment. Walker states, during Alexa's primary years, she responded to sexual harassment with cheeky responses, offering a flirty response rather than disengaging or not responding. Today, she offers a soft beep when harassed rather than engaging with the user. With this, she performs effective labor devoid of the leaky emotive quality that society has come to associate with the feminine body. And can we teach a bot to spread hate speech? Yes. For example, GPT-4chan is, commonly perceived as the worst kind of chatbot created ever, because it was trained on hate speech on 4chan portal, where there are no censorship in that how we can express ourselves, what we can say, and of course it was created to multiply hate speech. In such a situation, can AI be blamed for being a victim of sexism or human hostility towards others? No, we made it that way. This problem highlights the flip side of AI learning from humans. It acquires our biases and stereotypes, becoming sexist. When Alexa and Siri are given female voices, they creators more or less consciously reinforce the stereotype that women are there to assist, be calm, pleasant, and readily serve others. Someone might say, okay, let's add male voices to such voice assistants and the problem will be solved. However, the issue with AI is precisely that it can learn biases from data that appear completely neutral to humans, as they may lack gender indicators, for example. However, as research shows, AI doesn't learn and think analogously to humans, and consequently, it can see our social differences in seemingly neutral data. An example could be the Target store application, where a shopping app started suggesting pregnancy-related products to an American teenager. When her father accused the store of encouraging the girl to get pregnant, the teenager discovered that she was indeed pregnant. AI recognized her pregnancy based on dietary needs, even before she could realize what was happening to her body. The problem is that if this teenager had a miscarriage, long after that experience, she would still receive ads for children's clothes, which undoubtedly could affect her well-being and sense of dignity. AI, while registering changes in user behavior, cannot predict random situations, and yet these situations have a tremendous impact on how we perceive ourselves and other people. The application of the theory of recognition to research on AI, in my opinion, requires consideration of various ways of understanding recognition and vectors of these relationships, which I summarized in this table. So this is generally that's what I said, with maybe the last 2 lines, because of course, also in the research on human AI relationship, I believe we have to answer the question whether we are on a micro or macro perspective, in a sense that whether we analyze concrete situations, empirical cases, case studies, and so on, or we prefer to talk about sexist culture, inequalities on the level of politics, inequalities on the level of society, and so on. This is really a very, I would say, a huge discussion, and also a huge problem what kind of perspective we would like to take. In the most fundamental sense, human-AI relationships touch upon issues of human dignity and its understanding in the era of the presence of non-human technological actors. There are postulates to build responsible and ethical AI. To do it, we should involve considerations of epistemic justice and power, indicating who and how artificial intelligence is being utilized. In the discussion on artificial intelligence within the realm of philosophy, the prevailing perspective is ethical, specifically an attempt to define criteria for fair artificial intelligence in its creation, operation, and data management. However, social and political issues are researched to a lesser extent. Currently, the focus is primarily on identifying circumstances in which misrecognition occurs, where AI discriminates and perpetuates biases. The problem is that a world in which AI flawlessly identifies and categorizes people is a world of global digital surveillance, where nothing and no one can be hidden. So I'm not pretty sure whether we would really like to have AI which would really flawlessly identify us and did not ever make mistakes. As Judith Butler states, in the social world, one is never fully recognized with all their characteristics, capabilities, and talents. Perhaps the essence of the theory of recognition lies precisely in the continual struggle in the process of becoming oneself and not really to be fully recognized. To sum up, what would the theory of recognition look like in the era of or in the age of human-AI relations? Firstly, as I attempted to show, it would be a revitalization of familiar concepts, epistemic and normative recognition, but understood as a transition from the first to the second type of recognition. Secondly, it would be an acknowledgement of the difference between attributing human traits to AI and opening up to new and unexpected forms of relationships and attributes assigned to social actors, which might also be, of course, stimulated or motivated because of our relationship with AI. Thirdly, it would be an understanding that technology can be recognized without treating it equally to humans, but recognizing its influence on the moral behaviors of people. Finally, fourthly, it would be a theory of misrecognition, albeit probably without great hopes that fixing the technology itself will repair society and its biases. I agree with Massimo Airoldi, who states, rather than perfectly meeting or nudging their users' needs and wants, as respectively in the techno-optimistic myth of personalization, in the techno-pessimistic myth of manipulation, machine learning systems negotiate with them a common cultural ground. Iteration after iteration, feedback after feedback. The sum of these non-linear trajectories ultimately brings about the techno-social reproduction of society. The theory of recognition teaches us that since we need the other to understand ourselves, it may be worth examining ourselves in the social mirror that is AI and answering the question of whether the self-image we see gains our own recognition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. It was terrific and very clear, and I'm sure there are many, many questions from the audience. So for the Q&A, I would prefer if you can raise your virtual hand so I can see everyone. Astrid, I think there was.
No, I was clapping.
Okay, sorry. Aurelia.
Thank you, Natalia, for this wonderful talk. I think you made a very good case for all the problems we have when facing AI and whether our concepts still apply, whether we need new concepts. And well, but there's a dimension I was missing, I think, when listening to your talk. especially in this later part where you were discussing AI as a social agent.
Mhm.
And it's the dimension of accountability. I think when you believe, when you're thinking of a subject in terms, not only, I mean, you mentioned different traits that we could, that could sum up being, well, yeah, an agent or a person, and then being subject to recognition. But I think accountability should play an important role, especially because it would, I think, set AI apart, or I don't know. I would like to think to know your thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm. Shall I answer after the question, or yeah, okay. Yes. Well, generally, I think that we can make this kind of divide between being a social agent and being responsible, because I believe that, of course, the problem of accountability usually is solved or analyzed from the perspective of that what we can do to really create responsible AI, in the sense that, of course, we can train it, we can program it, we can create it in a way which will in effect will give us the preferable behaviors and relations. And I think generally we do not really believe that AI is responsible in a sense that in a sense of accountability, but we rather believe that this is, of course, the job of programmers and designers to make it responsible, in a sense to behave in a way that will be socially acceptable, and will, for example, be stimulate this kind of values we could socially accept. But it still doesn't mean that AI could not be treated as a social agent or social actor. I did not mention any kind of, I don't know, ontology which is behind of my thinking. So maybe because of that, you've asked me about it. And I'm still, to be honest, well, in a process of thinking and trying to answer to myself the question whether we can look at the level of ontology from relational perspective, in a sense that we will treat AI as an agent, for example, in the Bruno Latour tradition, as a kind of actant or actor, and because it does something, it changes something, it has some kind of influence, we can separately treat it as a kind of agent, social agent. Or we have to say that, okay, this is a kind of for example, semi-person or kind of artificial person, but also, of course, not understood in all of these aspects of personhood, which we usually apply to humans, but still some kinds of entity having different rights, different, different possibilities to behave in some kind of social reality, without assuming that, for example, it has to be conscious, because of course the problem of accountability is connected with the problem of consciousness, whether I can be responsible for my behavior. And I believe that we cannot skip this problem, to be honest, and just to look at what AI does as a kind of actor or agent, social agent, knowing that we designers and programmers, we introduce this kind of agent to the society. So still I think that, of course, people are responsible for the AI, but AI still does something with us, more or less consciously for us. Because of course the problem is also that it can be understood as the other object, or some kind of mediator between human beings. And then the fact that I can, for example, do not recognize the fact that I talk to a chatbot, and I don't know, fell in love with a chatbot, not recognizing the fact that this is just an artificial intelligence. Well, it does something to me as a human being still, even if, of course, we cannot say that, okay, AI is responsible for the fact that my feelings are devastated, for example, or something like that. So I'm aware about this problem of accountability, but I think that we can, of course, maybe shift this discussion rather to the field of society and social relations, without actually solving the problem of consciousness, non-consciousness, and accountability understood in a very strict sense of that artificial intelligence is responsible for something. We are using the phrase responsible AI rather to emphasize that we have to take it into account what it does. But yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I'm talking, I talk too much when I answer different questions during different seminars. I'm so sorry.
That's great. We have time. Natalia, you are the second.
Hi, thank you, Natalia. I mean, this is very interesting and surely addresses very relevant problems on where philosophy of technology can contribute to society. So it was very interesting. I have a question on one of the problems, I mean, one of the many problems that you posed as examples of like where there are these features of AI that are controversial, and you mentioned chat GPT-4 as maybe it was just the language, but I'm curious to see how you understand this. But the language suggested that you were thinking that it was it's one of the worst AI chats because
not ChatGPT.
In the sense, sorry?
It wasn't ChatGPT.
Oh,
it was a different kind of because I'm so sorry because I've interrupted you. Maybe you finish your question and I will then explain.
Well, yeah. In any case, I mean, if it is a chat, well, it would be nice if you clarify which chat it is, because then I misunderstood. But I understood you were describing it as being trained such that it would reflect hate speech. And I wanted to know if you understood this as something passive, just because, I mean, if in the training set you do not kind of filter hate speech, of course, it's going to be trained also in hate speech, although this may not be intentional, which does not, of course, hinder us from saying that the trainers are responsible for the hate speech produced. Or if you thought there was something more active involved by the people training the AI.
Okay, I will maybe come back to my slides because, well, yes, in the there are different chats for, of course, large linguistic models, and it was GPT-4chan before ChatGPT appeared, and it was created by some programmist and YouTuber who, well, use open program for large linguistic models, and, well, trained it on 4chan. 4chan is a portal for people with a very, I would say, controversial views, usually very racist, and generally 4chan is a place where it's a dark place of the internet, really. You don't want to see discussions which are which appear there. And GPT-4chan was generally created to train hate speech. And of course, I'm not talking about ChatGPT in this case. This is an example of intentionally created chat to learn, first of all, on the hate speech, and trained and navigated to multiply this hate speech. So of course, I use it as an example to show that we can train AI to be the most horrible kind of social agent imagined. But of course, it is also an example of the possibility to train artificial intelligence to narrow it, to canalize it to this kind of relations we would like to have. And I also know that there are this kind of bots and chatbots which are trained to, first of all, promote more, I would say, democratic discussion. They are chats, for example, who take part in discussions on Twitter. Well, now it's X. And they take part in this discussion, for example, to solve quarrels. And they contribute saying something, okay, I see that you are arguing, maybe we should take a break. And it really helps to make this discussion not so aggressive. So it's also interesting that, of course, it can work completely differently. But sometimes we do really horrible things with artificial intelligence. So it was only an example how we can use it in this sense, which I would say can be to some extent be called a misrecognition of AI, right? That we use it intentionally to really bad things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a very good example. I'm glad I asked because, yeah, there was something I was missing. Thanks.
Juan.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very, very interesting. I just have one brief question, and it's what is the place of this problem of value alignment in your account in your theory of recognition between AI and humans? So as I understand it, the value alignment problem simply is the idea that, you know, if we expect AI systems to be responsive to humans, we need to ask what they will be responsive to. Is that going to be human preferences? Is it going to be desires, second order desires, or values? So when you talk about AI recognizing humans, what exactly are they recognizing? And so curious what your view on that is.
That's a good question, because generally, of course, when we are talking about AI and values, we usually assume that, first of all, we know what humans expect. And if we don't know what humans expect, we can just make some research, right? And then they will tell us that they would expect that and that kind of behavior from AI. Of course, there are lots of there is also research, I would say, more observational, for example, that we try to create an artificial intelligence to behave similarly to humans. But first of all, we have to observe humans, right? But of course, this is a problem whether we, first of all, could to close the field of values and to pack it into the artificial intelligence, right? And I would say that probably with artificial intelligence, it is much more difficult in comparison to other technologies. But we do this in case of the other technologies, more simpler technologies than AI. And I think we are trying to do the same with AI. For example, we have this famous Laturian example of speed bumps. we use speed bumps, and drivers of cars, they have to slow down when they are approaching the speed bump. Why? Because drivers just would like not to crash their car. But of course, the social effect of this is that they are driving much slower in very sensitive areas. So we delegate to technologies different values, and we are doing this all the time with all of the architectural installations in the city, in building transport system, in solving different social problems which might be solved with different technologies. So I think that, first of all, we are trying to do the same with AI, but this is a little bit more complicated because the way AI learns is not so clear to us. I mean, of course, we could think about AI as an algorithm navigated and supervised by a human being, but neural networks are sometimes so complicated that this kind of navigation is not so easy. And even designers don't really know how these algorithms really work. And the problem is that we expect something from AI on the field of values, but it's not so easy to really catch why they do this and this, and whether we can really delegate so easily different values to them. And because of that, we, of course, we are in this, I would say, discussion whether it is possible to implement values to AI, or rather we should think about the social consequences, and then maybe after some kind of time and of course after observing what's going on in the society, we can of course correct artificial intelligence and, for example, focus on different biases, prejudices. We can try to build more responsible AI. But I would say that generally we are doing this after implementation. So of course the problem is that many situations are very harmful and people are really misrecognized by artificial intelligence, and we are training this artificial intelligence on them, but people generally, from the point of view of their dignity, for example, are treated very instrumentally in this situation, because we have to first of all use their data to learn, of course, to teach artificial intelligence. So of course the problem is also how we can do this without this possibly harmful situation, because we are not able to predict all the consequences. And also in the field of philosophy of technology, we have the whole field of research which is called unintended consequences. So we wanted to do something good, and unfortunately, well, there were some problems, and because of that, because we cannot predict everything, we have to do this work constantly. And of course, the problem is, again, whether changing something in the technology will really change something in the people. Because if AI is able to replicate different biases, even if we are trying to build the most neutral data possible, then there must be something with the society and the way how we really unconsciously share different biases and prejudices with, for example, the other people in the internet. So yeah, this is a huge problem, and I believe that generally we are trying to solve problems we've created.
Axel.
Oh, thank you so much. Gracias, Natalia. And I don't know if this is a question or just two sides of the same question, but when you talk about transitioning from the epistemic to the normative sense of recognition, I hope you don't mean to completely abandon the epistemic dimension of recognition, right? Because it seems like it seems like in the end, one of the reasons why you cannot leave the idea that all recognition that involves AI in a certain sense is a misrecognition is because, yeah, these are not full-fledged human agents with subjectivity, right? And it seems to me, as I heard the whole talk, especially now in the Q&A, but you never say explicitly, that a lot of these problems, if not all of them, come from the fact that we just forget that they are not subjective and we still treat them like subjective. So there's still an very strong epistemic dimension. But if this is so, then it seems that what we need is just to make AI more clearly non-human-like, right?
Yes.
Yeah, be even more uncanny, right? What we need is just to remind people that this is a machine, right? That this is an algorithm. Nobody's talking to you. No, yeah, we should destroy the robots and not give them burials and things like that, and not give them names. And yeah, yeah. So well, now I see that you are agreeing. But yeah, I would like to hear you develop more this idea on how there seems to be still a very strong epistemic basis there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I said that I do not assume that that human being is equal in this recognition relationship with artificial intelligence, but it still can be a kind of recognition, because recognition not necessarily has to be symmetrical. But as you said, interesting thing is that epistemic dimension, the fact that we forgot about the fact that we are talking to artificial intelligence, this ELIZA effect, which I mentioned, that sometimes we could even have more satisfying relationships with artificial intelligence. There are such people. And this is from social point of view very interesting, and also it forces us to pose the question, okay, so how can we describe this kind of relation between a human being and AI, knowing that this is unconscious being, still believe that, okay, I'm fine with that, this is an artificial intelligence, but I like to talk to my Alexa, for example. And I think the discussion with my Alexa is much more interesting than with my colleagues, for example. And to be honest, I was a participant of a conference where some speaker, admitted that he had no idea what he could say on the topic of the conference, and he asked ChatGPT, and he referenced that what ChatGPT said. And interesting was that he analyzed what ChatGPT suggested as if that would be a really, I would say, an interesting philosophical contribution to our discussion. So of course, we might say, okay, this was a kind of more sophisticated browser, but if we have more people believing that they have some kind of intellectually interesting, refreshing discussion, or some kind of relationship, maybe on a more emotional level with artificial intelligence, then we of course have to ask the question, okay, what's going on with this relation, and whether it is a kind of epistemic misrecognition of the fact that this is not a human being, this is not a real intersubjectivity. Or we can say that even if this is an epistemic misrecognition, it still is normative recognition, and we have still some problems with normative recognitions, which might be the consequence of this kind of epistemic misrecognition. So yes, when I'm saying that I believe that we have to make this transition from epistemic to normative, I'm rather following Butler. So I believe that her intention was to say that we start with epistemic recognition. First of all, we have to ask the question why we include some people to our community, why we define some people as people, why we give voice to some people and the other are without this possibility. And after that, we are able to speak about normative consequences of this, or because this is connected, right? From this epistemic recognition, we start the discussion about norms. We start the discussion about that what's going on later when we agree that, okay, there is a kind of relationship between these two beings, but the question is whether is it fine, okay, whether we believe this will be, I don't know, the future of the society, or maybe generally we see that people can be hurt, but also people can be affirmated. And of course, in that sense, it's not so easy to evaluate.
Oh, okay, I can see where we disagree, definitely. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That is very, very, very helpful.
Since I don't see anyone, I will profit to make you a couple of questions. So one is on this idea of the erkennen, which is a condition for Anerkennung. Because maybe I'm too biased, probably I'm too biased from Hegel and all the idealism. And I still have the feelings that in order to recognize something as belonging to a group class, we still need some norms previously. And I don't know if you will describe it as norms or, I mean, also in Hegel, in the end, in the struggle for life and death, there is a part in which it seems there is a sort of epistemic recognition when I see the other and he's moving like me, so there is a sort of mirroring between the two.
Yes, exactly. This is the mirroring, right? So you assume that it is a self-consciousness because it behaves like me, and we start the struggle for recognition, which is life and death struggle. But if we have a battlefield and we have robots and they also take part in this life and death struggle, even if, of course, there is no life and death in this case, how can we recognize that, okay, this is not a consciousness, right? Of course, I understand that Hegel tries to convince us that because of life and death struggle, we have this existential dimension behind self-consciousnesses. Whereas, and that is why I said, following Nolan Gertz, that we have to make this illicit move, right? So we have to, of course, for a moment, forget about the fact that technically, according to Hegel, there must be two self-consciousnesses to really speak about Anerkennung. But if we for a moment forget about this perspective of two different self-consciousnesses in this recognition relation, and just look at this from the perspective of the first one, then we might say, I only project my behavior on this other self-consciousness, and because it reacts as I would react, I assume that this is a self-consciousness. And I think that, of course, I know that this is in some sense maybe funny because, well, I opened ChatGPT and I know that this is not, well, it doesn't look like me, and I do not maybe it doesn't behave like me. And if I even ask it, do you have a consciousness? It will answer, no, I'm just a language, a large model, and I do not have a consciousness, and so on. But generally, if we just assume the fact that we are at the very beginning of this recognition relation, we are projecting something. And I also understand, of course, your perspective, because your perspective is more Hanetian. So first of all, we have to have norms to talk about society and about different people inside of the society. But then the problem is, and it is stated by Butler, okay, but what defines society?
Mhm.
And well, for example, women were not a part of the society, or did not really have full citizenship in ancient times. So what happened? Right? Well, we've changed as societies also on this level of values and norms. And maybe it was stimulated by the other, which were a human being such as women. And because of that, we've also changed our understanding of that, what a human being is. And I think that we have the same problem with animals. We attribute to them some qualities, which of course are not treated equally to us as human beings, but because they feel, because they have emotions, because we know that they are conscious. And to be honest, I think we rather know that they are to some level self-conscious as well. We believe that they could have some rights, even if they cannot express the struggle for recognition. So they also helps us to discover what kind of thinking about subjectivity we really have to assume from philosophical point of view, because maybe we are trying to talk about a human being knowing in advance the essence of human being, whereas the whole history and changes in culture and in politics and in our sensitivity just force us to feeling that there is no essence, right? There is no something given in advance. We are developing, and this is Hegelian dialectically, but we are developing, right? We are not just a given being at the very beginning of our being, so we change. And in that sense, I believe it might be also, well, maybe discussion about artificial intelligence will help us to reconsider what humanity is, and also what kind of not only values but qualities we believe are so important and so significant from our anthropological point of view, that we wouldn't like to maybe delegate it to artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, because I've interrupted to your question, but I know you, and I know what kind of thinking you are offering.
Although with norms, I was more on the Kantian side, so not.
Yeah, but Kant said that because of animals, we can also extend our understanding of humanity. So he was at the exact path of
yeah, of course. And the second point is kind of related to this problem of the mirroring, because I was thinking, what is really different in AI? Because you were saying there, we could say that there are cases in which human beings recognize the AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it's correct to call it recognition rather than mirroring.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that the experience I might have with a chat box could be very similar to the one I'm having reading a book or looking at a piece of art. Namely making an experience in which I'm doing something that has mostly the task to provide me with a better awareness of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not really that what I'm doing is providing recognition to the other in the sense of recognizing that the other is an end in itself, is autonomous or whatever, but rather discovering or deepening this dimension within myself during this activity.
Yes, well, generally, I would say that yes, even this discussion about projecting of our attributes to AI is actually the discussion about us. And of course, when we believe that AI could have this therapeutic effect, is also connected and focused on us. And well, I agree with you that maybe this is a kind of a hyperbole to say that we recognize AI in a sense that, or we can misrecognize AI. But I've decided to use it to show that this mirroring effect, it still does something. Well, there is a text of Mark Keckelberg who said that that even if this is only a kind of magical thinking, for example, attributing a life to some kind of machine, or even if we know that we are anthropomorphizing technology, our emotions are real. So that what happens with us in this moment of recognizing artificial intelligence in a sense that I treat it seriously as a companion, for example, or I treat it seriously as a social robot in the hospital, which should, for example, spend some time with patients and talk with them. If I seriously engage with this relation, my emotions are real. And because of that, I believe, of course, still, it is a kind of mirroring. I agree with this. But still, we can say that, okay, it's reversely changes my attitude to myself. It still is a kind of recognition relation, because if a recognition relation helps me to build my identity, I can build it also in this mirroring process, mirroring relation with artificial intelligence. Sometimes I do this consciously. For example, if you are aware that you are sharing some, for example, thoughts with AI, sometimes not. And interesting is this case of ChatGPT, because I'm not sure whether you are aware about the fact that when you are using ChatGPT, you are sharing your thoughts with artificial intelligence. Not only that what can be suggested by, for example, market services, or not only something what was prepared or profiled for you by artificial intelligence on social media, but you are willingly sharing your inner thoughts, your maybe deepest layer of your thinking with artificial intelligence. And we are doing this usually, I suppose, because it is a good translator, for example. But anyway, we are sharing with artificial intelligence something which is the most private sphere of us, our innerness, our thinking, something what Rousseau would say that, okay, society may, of course, regulate that how we behave, could regulate different rights and so on, but there is some kind of my intima, only mine. Whereas we might say, okay, well, we don't know whether in 2 or 3 or 5 years, ChatGPT would know such sensitive things about human beings, and we shared with it so many, so intimate thoughts that I'm not sure what kind of, well, the next generation of AI could be. what that AI would do with us. But I'm not techno-pessimistic generally, maybe realist.
Aurelia.
Thank you. Just on what you were saying just now. I mean, how you've described AI as a social agent is very similar as what we would say about the weather, for example. It has consequences. I mean, and we don't attribute any kind of I don't know, of subjecthood to weather, or not anymore anyway, or what we would say of the market as well. But I think one something that is for the time being more unique about AI is that I mean there is actually an interaction. When we talk about machine training, we're also kind of teaching the machine what it needs to do for us. It's not unidirectional in that sense. I mean, you could also say the same about the weather, right? We have consequences on the weather, and that's climate change, and on the market as well. But it's much more subtle, I would say, and not so immediate as a kind of interaction that we could have with AI, and that would make it maybe a more distinctive social agent. But I'm just sharing my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for them. Yes, and also we could say that weather is also a social agent. According to Latour, for example, that would also be a social agent, right? So of course, this thinking of agency and also this unintended consequences that's what cannot be fully projected by us. Yes, this is of course the essence, I suppose, and this is also the reason why we are talking so well vividly about artificial intelligence nowadays, because we see that there are lots of unexpected possible paths, and so we do not control it, we do not fully understand it, and also it is in some sense everywhere. Maybe of course this maybe this is too much, but if we know that this is in our smartphones, this is in our computers, this profiles us when we are at the airports. Well, there are so many different areas where we are affected by artificial intelligence. For example, different portals for people who are looking for a job. And of course, many of us are not aware that women are getting worse job offers than men because of different algorithms, which were actually based on usually men's CV, so curriculum vitae. So of course, it was trained in a way that men are better for different responsible jobs than women. And we could not be aware about the fact that it affects us so much. And because of that, of course, it's also a social agent. And we also had to, review its influence.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question because I'm your student from University of Warsaw, but I have a non-philosophical question. There is ongoing discussion, especially in Europe, about the legal regulation of AI. Do you think that this type of legal acts will be effective? I'm asking in the context of possibility of hacking chatbots with prompts and similar methods of bypassing blocks, filters imposed to AI.
Well, I believe that the fact that some countries forbidden using, for example, ChatGPT, or of course we need to regulate how people use artificial intelligence, for example, in the market. we need such kind of regulations, but again, as legal regulations are also some kind of normative regulations. So this is again the situation that we've observed, that in the social reality something very significant appeared, and the fact that we cannot control artificial intelligence in all of these fields forced us to regulate it somehow. So of course, first of all, well, we made mistakes. Now we are trying to correct it. But your question is very important, and thank you, Rafał, for participating in this event, because there is also a discussion about fields, sensitive social fields, where maybe artificial intelligence should be generally forbidden. And it is, for example, the problem of police units. Should really police use artificial intelligence and facial recognition to identify suspects? Because we know, as I also explained it in my speech, we have lots of problems with this. Or, for example, should hospitals use artificial intelligence for different programs analyzing and scanning human health? Because again, we know that the data, for example, used to train this artificial intelligence were taken from real medical reports of real people. And there is, for example, a question about the privacy. How can we train artificial intelligence, and whether we can accept the fact that it was trained on real human data, very sensitive data, and what to do with the fact that the people did not know that their data were used to train this artificial intelligence. And also in the field of medicine, we also have lots of biases. This is also a field where we know from social sciences that not all of the people are rescued in the equally, in a sense that we do not use different prejudices in deciding who should be rescued first. And there are different solutions to this problem. For example, there is a problem of creating synthetic data. So first of all, it can be also dangerous, because then we do not really know what kind of data AI produced and whether it can really be applied to real societies, because we are people. So of course, the problem is that, well, I don't want to maybe to be understood as someone who ignores prejudices and biases, but if it is a part of the society, and of course we are different also on the level of politics, societies, culture, and so on. This difference-blind politics, referring to Taylor, this assuming that if we produce the most neutral AI based on synthetic data, it will never hurt us, is very naive, because then we have no control what kind of approach it really has to a human being if it is not based on data on human being. But taking data from humans is also morally, well, at least discussing, right? For example, there is a discussion about ChatGPT, whether it is moral to use ChatGPT, because it learned itself on data from American journalists, as far as I remember. So of course there is a question, okay, it is a very good translator, this is a very good chat, but why it is? Because people created very good piece of art, and well, they've created good articles, and because of that it can imitate their style so well. So of course regulations are, in my opinion, important, because we have to at least control what is the most sensitive, but also we have to start the discussion in which areas, social areas, which are really sensitive, maybe we should generally forbid using artificial intelligence, because maybe these areas are so socially important that that this argument that, okay, but it's easier, maybe cheaper, maybe we can have results much faster, is not the only possible value which we should take into account.
If there are any further questions, I would just thank you, Natalia.
Oof, thank you very much, really. That was wonderful, even for me. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias por la invitación y espero que seguimos en contacto. Muchas gracias.